The origins of the slasher film genre often seem to be attributed to plays performed at the Grand Guignol in the 1890s, sparking a trend of using violence as a selling point that creeped into the film industry by the 1910s. For example, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho getting a few people into clear shower curtains is sometimes seen as a face of the genre. The 1960 movie introduced many to the Bates Motel, that you investigate in the 1988 game where despite movement being a bit slow in some versions, it is easy to navigate having real-time gameplay and a full-on investigation. I'm not normally into these escape room style games, but this is a quick one with real-time combat, so my interest was more piqued. I just wish there was more music to set the mood while investigating. Perhaps the style of gameplay does match the pacing of the movie. Now, one of the most iconic slasher movies must be 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Seeing a group of people on a road trip approach a house with gas-powered generators to attempt to barter for gas, only to find it's occupied by a grave-robbing family who attacks them, with one brother being someone who wears a mask of skin. In the 1983 game, you play as this brother, chasing down the tourists on your property before running out of gas. And revving that chainsaw causes gas to really drain, so there's a bit of resource management with 1,000 points awarded for everyone you catch, and more fuel rewarded for every 5 people. It gets old immediately for me. I could tell it's going for simple amusement, but it's not something that I find amusing for long. People often attribute the game's lack of impact to the controversial nature of the game's content, but I'm unconvinced of that. I just see another movie tie-in game in a time people felt burned on them. Usually something being controversial leads to it becoming forbidden fruit that sells more, which is why companies will sometimes try to create negative attention to take advantage of the rebellious nature of humans in making their games seem more like forbidden fruit. This makes it unreliable to believe someone says backlash happened without seeing the actual backlash for yourself, and it seems suspiciously hard to find that for 1983's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre compared to other games. If you ask me, it comes off as a scapegoat for the game not catching on. A 2006 game by the same name would maintain this gameplay loop but have the level design consist of platforming with power-ups for your chainsaw, and some enemies are armed to fight back. This game has a much greater focus on progression with multiple levels to get through, fleshing it out to something that much better held my interest. Hold on a second. If the Switch 2 is considered 10th gen then... Oh, if you want to buy Xbox One PS4 games, you have to go to the retro section of stores now. You know, for me, a game released today for the Atari 2600 isn't a retro game. It's just for a retro console. But I have seen to many a retro game just means it's on a retro system. If you go by that rule though, well, you know, it's a game you can pick up for that old retro system, the PS4. 2023's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which serves as a prequel to the 1974 movie. A competitive team versus team multiplayer game where one team is the combat-focused family and the other their stealth-focused prisoners. Alright, I'm yanking your chain. The year after this game, a Halloween game would be announced. And it wouldn't be the first time a Texas Chainsaw game was followed by a Halloween game. For the Halloween season of 1983, VCS players got a game based on the 1978 slasher film. A homicidal maniac has escaped from a mental institution. On Halloween night, the killer returns to his hometown to wreak havoc. You are a babysitter for a family in a large 2-story house. Somehow, the vengeful murderer has gotten inside. Can you protect the children and yourself from the fury of his knife? Now this game holds my interest much longer. It's not the kind of game I'd play regularly, but with its more complex loop and factors, I find it intriguing to pick up every once in a while. You're to lock as many children as possible in safe rooms, with every 5 children increasing the difficulty. And the children can meet a gruesome end, alongside yourself who has 3 lives. You could find the knife to go on the offense, forcing the unwanted guest to retreat. It seems to lodge into him each time as it leaves your hands, and you can find the toss somewhere else as he retreats from the room. I will say though, the music blasting whenever he's on screen gets old quickly. And perhaps for pure balancing, you can't hold a knife while leading a child. On top of all this, as the manual says, beware of electrical blackouts on the upper level, for the house is old and the wiring is faulty. At any moment you may find yourself plunged into darkness with the killer in pursuit. Halloween is often lumped in with Texas Chainsaw, and the finger for it not catching on being blamed on controversy, which similarly strikes me as a scapegoat given the reputation of VCS movie games a month after Atari's trip to the landfill. 1983's Halloween is far more ambitious than 1983's Texas Chainsaw. Unlike their aughts games, Michael Myers' Rampage really nails a simple game. You simply try to successfully slay different people trying to dodge your attacks without moving their feet, as they're mostly cornered, but your goal is to set the shortest time, which is a directing decision that turns what could have been a less satisfying version of Desktop Destroyer into a rapid competitive challenge that doesn't give you time to take in more than the visceral action you're trying to commit. My favorite slasher movie series is probably Friday the 13th, and there are a lot of games both heavily inspired by the films and officially licensing them. The purpose of this tape is to look at the licensed. In 1985, Jeremy Spencer of Crash Magazine reported that Friday the 13th, the computer game, would be based on the second movie, but also says the first movie took place in the 1950s. Perhaps he was told this by the person walking him through the game, as the manual also implies this. A quiet holiday camp at Crystal Lake is disturbed when one of the campers, Jason, is drowned. His mother, distraught with grief, blames the other campers who did nothing to help him. She vows revenge and murders all the holiday makers, except one girl, who kills her. The survivor floats into the middle of the lake where Jason rises from the water to take his revenge. Jason is still wreaking havoc throughout Crystal Lake when you arrive for a holiday. Now this diverges from the movie, where there is around a 20-year gap between Jason drowning in the 1950s and his mother Pamela finally meeting her end to one of her victims finally getting the better of her. This survivor is rescued from a boat floating across the lake where it is implied she dreamed of a decayed child Jason pulling her under. This is even reiterated in the second movie before she meets her end to a mysterious adult home invader, and it cuts to 5 years after the first movie, where the camp has since been condemned, marked off limits by law, becoming the horror story of Camp Blood. But when another camp is open connecting to the same lake, some couldn't help their curiosity, and in visiting the abandoned location seem to disturb an adult male who's been squatting there that begins picking them off. Having spent the movie spooking each other with campfire stories, they assume this to be Jason, who survived and somehow managed to avoid being found by his obsessed mother for 20 years. This is an important divergence because that 20 years of Pamela living obsessed with her late son doesn't occur in the game's timeline. And the game implies the child Jason rising was no dream but an actual zombie who can age. Before the later movies retroactively added that Jason was always undead, the original trilogy portrayed him as just a deformed man who took campy amounts of punishment before finally meeting his end to close off the trilogy. Though despite not saying zombie, they did briefly explore the supernatural resurrection idea to bring him back one more time in the fourth movie before passing the torch. So the game doesn't beat the movies to the idea, but fleshed out its own version, and I assume did so retroactively from the game itself being finished, to match the movies backtracking their moving on from Jason as well. The sixth movie had a bolt of lightning strike his grave to bring him back as the decayed powerhouse zombie who can no longer run that he's known for, and came out the same summer as the game, who would have known the discourse around the fifth and maybe even early rumblings about the sixth movie's intentions. I think Jeremy was lied to. The hockey mask wasn't even in the second movie, and I don't think Jason is in this game at all. I suspect they changed the text in the manual without changing the game itself because it seems to be based on the fifth movie, about how the impact Jason left was inspiring copycats, visually distinct from him by having blue chevrons instead of red, what the game seems to actually be. You are a group of 10 visiting the infamous Camp Crystal Lake. When unpacking, you find a blood-stained hockey mask among your group's luggage. One of you is a Jason copycat. But who? A murder mystery where you explore the area that notably has no lake, trying to find out who of your group is the killer, and getting them before all of you are got. Technically, you can be a Jason copycat yourself if you decide to just get all your own friends. And you are the one with the mask. The blue chevroned mask of a copycat representing your sanity. But you win by getting rid of the true killer. There's some interesting concepts, like there's a system where the person playing Jason will go for the person panicking the most. And there's also a gathering mechanic where you can tell people not to split up and bunker down in the church instead while you look for others. But they'll get bored or antsy and venture out. If you accidentally tell whoever in your group is the Jason copycat about the church, he or she will just try to get someone anyway and everyone will retreat in opposite directions. It appears you are the one in 9 with the courage to fight back in the heat of the moment. There are 5 levels with you assuming the role of different members of the friend circle. But most seem to remember this game for either having blood capsules that I'm not sure would still be good to put in your mouth, or for having the most generic royalty-free music, from Old MacDonald to the most stereotypical horror song to ever be in D minor. You know who brought a great original score in my opinion? Atlus, who shortly before Megami Tensei 2 would make what might be the most well-known Friday the 13th game in 1989. Whenever I see the title screen of this game, I remember hearing people describe the fear and awe they had of this game as kids when it came out. It was this forbidden adult horror game, even though it came at a time when in the absence of the ESRB to shield them from the backlash of offended passerbys. Nintendo was far more censorship heavy in being overly cautious of their legislatively vulnerable position compared to their post-ESRB selves. This 6-year policy affected Nintendo of America's reputation so severely that people who were born after these rules were reversed would mistakenly think them still in effect over 30 years after they were repealed, despite not only decades of Nintendo approving content that couldn't exist on their platform under that old rule set, but releasing their own ESRB M-rated games ever since as well. But before those rules were started, the NES had already built a horror library, and even during those 6 years, those rules did not stop new horror games from coming out. Limitation just had to breed creativity. In this horror game, you play as a group of 6 camp counselors responsible for children when Jason begins striking. You won't just get the kids, but also you and your friends split up around the camp, which is the purpose of small cabins to swap to another counselor. There's nowhere safe from Jason to put the kids, so you'll have to fight him off for 3 days, with beautiful and eerie scenery across different times of day. Though compared to the previous game and the original movies where Jason was just some girl or guy, zombie powerhouse Jason of the later movies is a durable force that has commanded both respect and frustration from players. Due to the rental laws of the US, publishers didn't have a say on if their games could be made available for rent or not, resulting in a trend of making the US versions of video games much harder to win at, in order to stop most people from being able to finish a game with the normal difficulty of US games sometimes even being offered in other countries as an extra specially hard challenge mode. I say it was a trend, but it would go on from the 3rd to the 4th, 5th, and at least the end of the 6th generation. I wouldn't be surprised if there's even 7th gen examples. And according to the game tester Ryutaro Ito, publisher LJN imposing this on Friday the 13th's development is responsible for the double-edged sword of this game overall being a harsh challenge some respect, and others find too frustrating to work at. You all start off with no weapons, only being able to throw rocks. And apart from wolves, bats, and killer crows, Jason isn't the only zombie around, as all his victims are rising from the dead too. There's a full zombie apocalypse happening that the manual recommends using to farm for weapons and items, giving the game a grunt enemy to keep satisfaction up for combat. They can also drop a lighter that can be used to light fireplaces for pretty good drops, like a flashlight to make exploring the platforming cave area easier, or one of the rare weapons to completely breeze through the combat. There's locked doors, files to read, and many approaches to take. You can row across the lake, you can find Jason's cabin whose front door is locked, implying Jason carries house keys. Inside, however, is Pamela's head, and in what is perhaps my favorite liberty taken from a Friday the 13th game, it flies at you and attacks you. It also has various drops including Pamela's sweater, which is thick and dampens damage from enemies. Of course, supposedly when you put on the sweater, Jason has a chance of mistaking you for Pamela when at a distance, but he'll catch on if you're face to face. There you can get a good look at Atlus's Jason design sporting purple accented by blue. By the 90s, calibration screens weren't an uncommon way to find the right look for everyone's varying displays, while the 80s NES game way tended to be to make things pop enough to be a one-size-fits-all image. Some customers run the darkened picture of weathered family CRTs with NES launch cables, so the red on the crow was vital to it not sneaking up on those players. Still, some people wonder why not use that color palette for Jason and make the white of his mask like the red of the crow to go for photorealistic colors. But perhaps to see pleasant detail or just easily see what you're doing. The whole game has a rather colorful cartoon look common of the era, so Jason's sprites actually look natural in darkness to me, which is what I assume they were designed around. The kids have unique palettes for light and dark, but you and Jason don't, with palettes that have to universally pop in every environment at every time of day. There's a common theory that the choice of purple and blue in particular came from the 3D drawing on the back of the theater program for Friday the 13th Part 3D, but I've always thought this sounded a little far-fetched for how much traction it has. And it becomes even harder to believe when it morphs into the devs not knowing what Jason looked like outside of this booklet when it includes a splash of color stills including the actual shot of Jason coming through the window, or the Part 4 shot the game opens on. The previous English-made game went with the same mask color for the same shot in their CPC port, and I believe both games' developments would have been a bit early for it to be likely they took inspiration from the poster of Jason Takes Manhattan, which is another theory. Maybe the Part 7 poster using a Part 5 mask is responsible for the game's sprite lacking a brow chevron. Or maybe they just didn't want to turn into a unibrow when viewed through a CRT. As for the color theories, I more lean toward these being coincidence because I'm not sure you'd need inspiration to think of representing darkness with blue in a cartoon or even saturating black to purple, especially in a spooky context. But the true answer may be forever lost to the memories of Hideyuki Yokoyama, before he disappeared to the fishing realm. Outside, however, can trip people up navigating due to the roads being circular despite the traversal outside being side-scrolling. At the bottom of a circle, left is left and right is right, but as you loop up to the top of a circle, you're now upside down from the perspective of the map, making right take you left on the map and left take you right on the map. The actual goal of this game is simple despite being challenging. Fight off Jason for 3 days with at least one playable character and one child surviving by the end. But you have so many ways to strategize and plan doing this. Different people prefer to take Jason on in the side-scrolling nature versus the behind-the-back interiors. The 1980s was a time of so many strong horror games, including Namco's slasher movie-inspired beat-em-up series Splatterhouse, that out-Jasoned the official games to many. In 2006, Friday the 13th would officially try this gameplay style with the Java micro game Road to Hell, where Jason is traveling down to the depths in search of a boiling cauldron to enjoy the agony of sinners down there. I can dig the more Splatterhouse-esque visuals, but it just falls short in the gameplay department for me. Its pacing is a bit too slow. Releasing in 2006, I can see it trying to capture that menacing Ken Kirzinger Jason movement, but I just don't think being faithful to that works for a side-scrolling beat-em-up with these visuals. If it weren't for the variety of weapons, I'd call this the slasher equivalent of Godzilla the series Monster Wars, and I suspect the thorn in the side might be the platform choice. Are you going to develop a full-on Splatterhouse game for $3? And how could you compete on the 2006 phone market for more than $3? Well, Road to Hell would rebrand to Thursday the 12th upon its license expiring, and another would throw their hat at making a Friday the 13th game. Xenodex's game is an adaptation of the first movie, including the degree of violence from the first movie. The minimalism of the sound and music can come off as retro in a bad way though. But this is surprisingly a good genre fit for what the first Friday the 13th is. A gruesome murder mystery. Now around this time, the 7th generation is when that multiplayer style of a group of players on one team versus one superpowered player was becoming a common occurrence in horror games. And this continued through the 8th generation, with one game in development being Slasher Volume 1. I assume the idea being that each volume could parody a different slasher film, with the first being Friday the 13th. Retro Realms Arcade would eventually be a Splatterhouse style version of this concept, but offer officially licensed expansion packs instead of selling separately as sequels. While Slasher Volume 1 would attract the attention of the Friday the 13th license holder, and become officially licensed itself. But they would go for that group of players versus one powerful player style multiplayer as their focus. As the game updated, they'd add every Jason from Part 2 up to Part 9, including a copycat Jason for Part 5. They'd also add other characters from the movies and eventually use it all to create a single-player campaign that you can play through as the Jason of your choice. I do wish they went through the trouble of having some kid dub over Pamela's lines for the copycat Jason though.
Find them, Jason.
Many point out how odd it feels that her voice is still in your head when you play as him. They'd also had a skin for Atlas Jason though. I don't know why they made it a skin for Part 3 Jason. There was an action figure that did the same thing, and I could only speculate it was either because of the 3D advertisement theory, or the press kit for the game using Part 3 as opposed to Part 7's Zombie Jason being on the cover, and I imagine most people presumed this Zombie Jason in the game. Am I crazy? The key distinction in the PS4 game being that pre-Lightning Bolt Jasons can run while post-Lightning Bolt Jasons can't. Though you can turn into this Evil Dead effect to move around the map faster than any other player in the game. I don't think I ever liked the solution to humans being able to outrun the zombie Jasons. It is an interesting conundrum of gameplay though. I never understood why people call the body language Kane Hodder gives Jason subtle, but it is definitely distinct. It makes the 3 Jasons in this game he played feel more themselves, though it can have the reverse effect for the 5 Jasons he didn't play. I always saw his body language as exaggerated in a way that matches the less serious tones of the movies he's played Jason in, which was not a direction for the series I'm as into when going back. Some people really like slashers to be campy with cartoon logic, but that's never been for me. Outside of that, the game overall always came off as clunky feeling to me. Moving around and doing things always felt as rough as the character models looked. If it weren't for the license, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed anything about this game. Except this one kill. The matchmaking troubles I'm forgiving of. The game just generally felt so bare bones in content and execution. You know, watching a cutscene that got old fast too many times to start a match. Its initial release felt more like a rough beta that took a year to feel like the amount of content I would expect of a 1.0. But to be fair, I'm the only person I know who felt this way. Everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives during this game's heyday. A single-player DLC that was first-person would end up teasing the 10th movie's content. which I was interested in. But to many surprise, there was some copyright act that allows the movie's writer to demand a transfer of the rights to them after 35 years. And with the 2010s being 35 years after 1980, the original movie's writer did this with the court ruling in his favor. Meaning he now owned the rights to that first movie in the US, which includes that depiction of Camp Crystal Lake and the staple character of Pamela. The future content would be cancelled, meaning no Jason X content. Though it would still get a handheld port. There was Friday the 13th Puzzle Killer that got to Jason X before they shut them down, and they would state that they couldn't renew the license, painting a picture that Gunn couldn't keep the PS4 game up if they wanted to. People do still seem to buy it physically, though it appears the game saved and unlocked things via an always online account syncing, meaning the absence of a server even affects single-player modes. Now you know what I always thought must be a real nightmare to develop? How do you tackle making a Nightmare on Elm Street game? The movies are about a child abductor who is burned alive by the parents of the town before coming back as a spirit to get the rest of the children through their nightmares, doing them in with such unique, non-repeating visuals. Well, the idea for an NES game is that the player is Freddy, and can travel through the electrical and plumbing lines as well as mirrors to get around Elm Street, slaying the teenagers trying to get rid of you by finding your scattered remains and burying them, finally putting your soul to rest. Mentioning that some will have powerful dream alter egos that can awaken implies lucid dreamers that can fight against you. Not much information about this version of the game exists, as by the Halloween season of 1989, Nintendo Power would report the script has been flipped, and you now play the teenagers in 4-player simultaneous co-op. You're still looking for Freddy's bones, but you must also now find a key to Elm Street High School so you can burn them in a furnace. The world map was also changed to side-scrolling with enemies to encounter. Though I will say Elm Street isn't the prettiest to look at when there's so much brick wall with no background. I do like that it doesn't loop in this case, allowing you to hit a dead end and backtrack through danger. You have to decide if you're going to go left or right when exiting a place, with consequence to choosing the wrong direction. And it is quite a diverse map. You have a cemetery, Freddy's old boarded-up house. Each area is an abstract interpretation of the location, though there is an awake and dream world version of everywhere that are minimally different. They don't change from mundane to fantastical. They always kind of look like a nightmare and just change into a Silent Hill Otherworld version of themselves. Becoming too sleep-deprived and finally falling asleep really just teleports you to a harder version of the world. And sometimes you will just fall asleep at set points to fight bosses. Coffee can help you fight off your sleepiness. With the game promoting your party and multiplayer, make sure each other doesn't fall asleep, which is so cool. The game really does feel made for that group exploration. I find the game simpler but harder than LJN's Friday the 13th, with the deck stacked so against you that I might only recommend you play with at least one other player. It definitely hits different reaching the end of a level and realizing you're missing a single bone. The trade-off to falling asleep is you can lucid dream in the form of 3 Dream Warrior classes you can each obtain and swap between. These classes seem to only be obtainable in the waking world to then defend yourself in the dream world. But if you're in the dream world too long, Freddy will find you. You'll know he's near as his lullaby begins to play, adding an element of pursuer horror to this game. Hitting a boombox can snap you awake, and the music ramp-up can feel so invigorating. To me, it successfully captures the vibe of the Dream Warriors in the movie. As for the actual imagery of this game though, it's so-so. There's some pretty good designs in this, but it does run into the problem of not having enough variety. But the game generally captures the vibe of exploring a Nightmare on Elm Street together. Now if you want a more single-player focused game, this was preceded by an official game of the famous third movie for the C64 and DOS 211, and the DOS version's visual additions easily make it my preference. The game can have quite a strong first impression, from Freddy slashing his way through the bureaucracy to introduce himself, to already cheating against you in the character select screen of the DOS version. Joey serves as the damsel in distress as he did in the movie, making him unselectable off the bat. But as you decide who you want to select, Freddy might just take them at random, so pick before Freddy gets you here in the menu. Once you select someone, you're dropped into a surprisingly detailed Springwood with diners, gas station, parks, and parked cars. But this is a nightmare, and a giant Freddy is chasing you through the streets. You're on the lookout for Freddy's old decrepit house to try to get in his head, but this isn't some set sequence. His old house will be at a different address each playthrough. Once inside, you have but a moment to prepare yourself, as this real-time game has limited ammo, inventory, and you start with no weapon. But you could grab a knife and bat here. Now instead of picking up classes, each character is their set class from the movie, creating a wide variety of durability and abilities that may range in usefulness to you. For example, Will is a glass cannon wizard who can shoot lightning from his hands, while Nancy, perhaps driven to save him, can take more before breaking, but her ability isn't offense-based. It's to freeze the game clock. This may be appropriate for what her goal in the dream world would be, because opening a secret passage and venturing deeper into Freddy's house has you venture into impossible space where the other members are about but vulnerable. You can try to find them and build up a party to take on Freddy as the Dream Warriors. But as the game states, he will cheat and change the rules without you even knowing. I can't remember ever playing a survival horror game that screws with you this much. Because it's not just visual scares. You have to live with the consequences of being messed with at any moment, leaving you constantly on edge. You'll see a weapon you wanted behind a locked door, and upon unlocking it not only turns into batteries for a weapon you don't have, but maybe the key also causes the spinning whirlpool that damages you rapidly to move one space over where you'd most likely have avoided it to. However, sometimes the way forward is disguised as any number of things, including one of these whirlpools, making you not sure if you should try to jump into them. You don't know what to trust. The spirit of Freddy's mother Amanda is trying to help you so her and her son can both be laid to rest. But you can't tell when the guidance you're being given is secretly Freddy trying to mislead you. And much like the movie, he won't wait for you to come to him. He's out trying to get you guys and will attempt cheap, quick kills while still focusing on self-preservation. To make sure you didn't just copy the game, you may also run into a quiz needing information from the manual. And I don't know if it's by design, but when I try to answer wrong, it locks the game, so I hope you save before this sprung up on you. I actually love this. And you of course would never get a shady copy of the game now, would you? But what's dastardly is you have 6 item slots in your limited inventory and placed in probably intentionally unavoidable places to mess with you. Are magnets that replace a random item in your inventory upon touching. Often packed in groups to drain your patience as you're thinking about where to drop the magnets to pick your item back up, and hopefully you even notice this happened. Coffee works as a healing item, which is weird because you're not waking yourself up. Similarly, Hypnosil, which is used for dream suppression in the movies, is both a heal and replenishes your Dream Warrior mana. You'd think it'd be a healing item at the expense of your ability to lucid dream. There's also holy water that acts as hand grenades on top of just regular old hand grenades. There's even coins and vending machines, which is the kind of goofy that fits right in with A Nightmare on Elm Street. You can buy maps here, though I never found any area hard to learn or remember the layout of. There's even a mining mechanic, which is why Kincaid tends to become a fan favorite of players who don't need more projectiles than the guns provide, like myself. His super strength is strong enough to punch through mineable areas without having a pickaxe take up an inventory space. Though he is a power puncher who can gas out quickly in this regard. When it comes to the game world, it mostly does a good job of feeling like the way the dream worlds are portrayed in both the movies and the show. The rooftops, ectoplasm maze, it all coming to you finding yourself in the boiler room environment that's become iconic of Freddy. I even take note of the C64 version of Freddy's house using gray metal frames and uncrosshatched textures on chairs, and what are sofas in the DOS version but closer resemble metal frame benches in the C64 version. This doesn't look like home furniture. In fact, when you get to the wheelchairs, it makes me wonder if this is a mind trick to look like the mental hospital your characters come from. Now that'd be some nightmare trickery. And that's where I think the ice dungeon is one area that I think pushes it too generic after I already think the ectoplasm maze is on the edge. To me, the familiar places of our lives is integral to the recipe of looking like a nightmare. Stray too far from that and it stops capturing the personal aspect that makes dreaming impactful. It's so fascinating thinking about how to approach making a video game of A Nightmare on Elm Street. The sleep deprivation aspect is probably the most interesting to explore to me. There was an FMV game that's now lost media called Keep Her Awake, where you're being scored for how long you can possibly stay awake, before finally hopelessly succumbing to Freddy. You see so many different genres being attempted for slasher film games. You know, in 2011 there was a Scream game that was basically a casual version of Hotline Miami where you play as Ghostface, and I see many like it as simple, dumb fun. There's still new slasher movies coming out with new video games, and with history present, it'll be exciting to see how upcoming slasher movie games will take things even further. I'm Mukhtar.